Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
It's good to be here.
Today, we are looking at a set of numbers that, quite frankly, they defy comprehension. If you just glance at the stat sheet, it really looks like a typo. We're talking about the number 49.
49.
49 confirmed murder convictions. That's 49 individual human lives. Mothers, daughters, sisters, all extinguished by a single person.
And that's just the official number, the one that the courts can prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly, because that is just what the court records show. When you actually sit down with the confession tapes, and we have the transcripts right here, the numbers, they just spiral out of control. We're talking 71, maybe 90, possibly even more.
He eventually lost count himself. And that's the truly terrifying baseline we have to start from today. I mean, it creates a scale of victimization that is just, it's almost unprecedented in American criminal history, at least when you're talking about confirmed convictions. You have other killers who claim these huge numbers, Henry Lee Lucas or someone like that. But in terms of verified bodies, Gary Ridgway is at the absolute peak.
We are, of course, talking about Gary Leon Ridgway, the man they call the Green River Killer. And, I want to start with a confession of my own here. When I hear a phrase like prolific serial killer, my brain, and I'm guessing most people's brains, it immediately goes to Hollywood.
Sure.
We think of the evil genius, that Hannibal Lecter type, Someone who is incredibly sophisticated, a high IQ, playing this game of four-dimensional chess with the FBI.
And that is the very first and probably the most important myth we have to dismantle right now. Because the reality of Gary Ridgway is infinitely more disturbing precisely because he wasn't a genius. Not even close.
No, looking at his background here, his IQ is low.
In the low 80s, he was dyslexic. He was held back a year in school, barely made it through high school. He worked a simple blue-collar job painting trucks at the Kenworth factory for 30 years.
30 years of the same job.
Yep. He went to church. He was, by some accounts, that guy next door who mowed his lawn and complained about the neighborhood kids. And yet, this man, this incredibly average, unremarkable, low-intellect man, managed to evade the largest police task force in the country for 2 decades.
That's the whole question, isn't it? That is the central tension of this deep dive.
Right.
How? How does a guy who paints trucks, who isn't some kind of criminal mastermind, get away with murder on an industrial scale for that long?
Well, it forces us to look at the blind spots in our society. Ridgway wasn't a predator who outsmarted the system in some brilliant way. He was a predator who understood exactly who the system didn't care about.
The vulnerable.
The most vulnerable. He targeted sex workers, runaways, vulnerable teenagers who were estranged from their families. He operated in that gap where society tends to look away. He literally banked on our indifference to their fate.
So here's our mission for today. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us. Criminal profiles from the FBI, the Green River Task Force reports, the full details of his really controversial plea bargain, and some very recent news from late 2025 regarding his health and his incarceration.
A lot to get through.
A lot. We're going to unpack the psychology of the man, the gruesome details of his methods, the massive investigation that eventually caught him, and this is the part I'm really interested to get into, the Ted Bundy connection.
It's a true Silence of the Lambs moment. It really is. The police asking one monster how to catch another.
But before we get to the investigation, we really have to understand the origin. Where does a monster like this come from? So let's go back. Salt Lake City, Utah, February 18th, 1949. Gary Leon Ridgway is born. What do we see in those early years?
You see the cracks forming almost immediately. The family dynamic was, well, volatile is putting it mildly. His parents had a terrible marriage. There was constant screaming, a lot of tension in the household. But the core issue, the one that forensic psychologists really focus on, is his mother.
That's a recurring theme in criminology, isn't it? The mother-son relationship.
Unfortunately, yes. It's a very common thread. Ridgway's mother, Mary, was described as incredibly domineering. She controlled everything in the house. She inflicted corporal punishment on Gary and his brothers for even the most minor infractions. But it wasn't just about discipline.
No.
Ridgway later revealed a very, very disturbing internal conflict he had regarding her. It's difficult to talk about, but it's essential to understanding his psychology.
This is where it gets dark fast.
It does. He admitted to investigators that he had feelings of sexual attraction toward her, but at the exact same time, he harbored intense fantasies about killing her.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack for a young boy.
That is the nexus of the pathology right there. You have the fusion of sexual desire and violent rage, and it's all directed at the primary female figure in his life, It creates a kind of wiring in the developing brain where sex and death, or sex and violence, they become inextricably linked.
He couldn't separate the two.
He couldn't. And since he obviously couldn't act out that specific twisted fantasy on his own mother, he eventually projected that cocktail of lust and hate onto other women who he saw as acceptable targets.
And his father wasn't exactly helping the situation?
Not at all. His father, Thomas, was a bus driver. He would come home from his route and complain constantly, almost obsessively, about the sex workers he saw on the streets. He demonized them. He called them filth.
So you got this perfect storm brewing.
A perfect storm. You have the mother creating this internal confusion of desire and violence, and you have the father standing there pointing a finger and telling him, those women on the street, they are trash, they are less than human. It gave Gary Ridgway a target class for all of his repressed rage.
And we see the first real explosion of this violence when he's just 16. I think a lot of people assume the Green River killings in the 80s were his start, but there was a huge precursor.
A massive red flag that somehow gets overlooked. At 16 years old, he lures a 6-year-old boy into the woods.
6 years old.
A child. And this wasn't a playground fight that went too far. This was predatory. He took this child into a secluded area and he stabbed him. The knife went clean through the ribs and punctured the boy's liver.
And the boy survived.
Miraculously, yes, he survived. But just think about the psychology of a 16-year-old who is capable of that. That is a premeditated, predatory attempt on a human life. And for what? For nothing. There was no motive other than the act itself.
And yet he just moves on. How does he not end up in the system after something like that? He graduates high school, he joins the Navy.
He did. He served in the Navy during the Vietnam War on a supply ship. He even saw combat, and this is where the behavioral patterns we see later really start to lock in. While he's in the military, stationed in places like the Philippines, he is frequenting sex workers constantly.
And he's married at this point. He married his high school sweetheart right out of school.
That's right. He contracts gonorrhea and brings it home to his wife. And despite her being, justifiably furious about the infection and the betrayal, he doesn't stop. He continues doing it, often without protection. It just shows a complete and utter lack of empathy or any concern for consequences. He simply didn't care.
So what did his friends think of him? The people around him?
The description that comes up over and over is friendly but strange.
Friendly but strange. That's that uncanny valley feeling, isn't it?
It's exactly that. It's the mask of sanity. He could function, he could hold a job, get married, go to family barbecues, but the wiring underneath it all was just completely fundamentally wrong.
So let's move forward now into the 1980s. This is when the nightmare begins in earnest for the people of King County, Washington. The timeline generally starts around 1982.
That's when the bodies start appearing. The peak of his murderous activity was this absolute frenzy between 1982 and 1984. I mean, we are talking about women and teenage girls disappearing sometimes every other week. The pace was staggering.
And he was hunting along a specific stretch of road, the Pacific Highway South, the SeaTac Strip.
He called it the Strip. It was his territory. He knew that area intimately. He knew the women working there were often estranged from their families or living on the margins of society. He knew they wouldn't be reported missing immediately. That wasn't an accident. That was a calculated part of his modus operandi.
Let's talk about that MO, because there is one detail in the police reports that honestly just chills me to the bone. The prop he used.
The picture of his son.
It's diabolically manipulative.
It is evil genius in its simplicity. He would pull up in his truck a potential customer, and to gain a woman's trust, he would show her a photo of his little boy that he kept in his wallet.
It's a signal.
It's a perfect signal. He was saying, look at me, I'm a dad, I'm a family man, I'm safe, I'm a nice guy. And it would lower their defenses completely. It would make them think he wasn't a threat.
And once he had them in the truck, or took them somewhere secluded.
Once he had them isolated, sometimes in his home, sometimes in his truck, often in the woods, he would engage in sexual activity. And then came the chokehold.
He didn't use a gun. He didn't usually use a knife for the murders themselves.
No, his preferred method was strangulation. He would attack from behind, wrap his arm around their neck in a sleeper hold. And strangulation is a very intimate, personal way to kill someone.
It's not quick.
It's not quick. It requires physical dominance. It takes time. You have to look at the person. You have to feel the life leaving their body. For him, that was part of the ritual. The control.
And then he would dump the bodies. Which is how he gets the name, the Green River Killer.
That's right. The first 5 victims that were discovered were found in or along the Green River. But he used clusters of woods all over South King County, near the SeaTac airport in remote areas. To him, these women were disposable. He treated their bodies like trash.
And this is a really difficult part of the story to discuss, but it's essential to understanding his psychology. He didn't just leave them there.
No, he went back.
He returned to the dump sites.
Frequently, he would go back to the locations where he loved them, and he would engage in necrophilia with the decomposing bodies.
God, I have to ask, why? I mean, beyond the obvious depravity, was it just about sexual gratification? Or was there something else driving that particular behavior?
Well, this is where it gets even more twisted. Ridgway had a pragmatic logic for it. He later explained to investigators that having sex with the bodies actually reduced his urge to go out and hunt for a living victim.
Wait, he saw it as a safety measure.
In his mind, yes. Necrophilia was a way to limit his exposure to getting caught. It scratched the itch, so to speak, without the risk of abducting another person.
That is one of the most horrifying things I have ever heard. He's risk managing his serial killing by sexually assaulting corpses.
It is. It shows that his primary motivation, above all else, was self-preservation. He was also taking other forensic countermeasures. He would remove their clothing to delay identification. He would scatter gum wrappers or cigarette butts that didn't belong to him at the crime scenes to confuse investigators.
He was trying to plant false evidence.
Exactly. He was thinking, maybe not like a genius, but he was thinking about how to get away with it.
There is one specific anecdote about his countermeasures that I found completely unbelievable. The trip to Oregon.
This is one of the most chilling stories in the entire case file. He knew the police were on high alert in Washington. The Green River Task Force was all over the news. So he decided he needed to move some of the evidence. He dug up the remains of some of his victims and transported them across state lines to Portland, Oregon. His thinking was that it would confuse the jurisdictional boundaries between police departments.
But he didn't go on this trip alone.
No. He took his young son with him.
Oh my God.
He told his son they were going on a fun camping trip. So you have to picture the scene. You have a man driving his truck down Interstate 5. His child is in the passenger seat, probably excited, sleeping, playing a game. And there are human remains in the trunk of the car.
It's that compartmentalization again. The dating father taking his kid camping, literally inches away from the evidence of his own monstrosity.
It speaks to a complete and total lack of moral integration. There was no connection between those two parts of his life. He could switch roles instantly, flawlessly.
So bodies are piling up, 1982, 1983. The police are obviously not blind to this. The King County Sheriff's Office forms the Green River Task Force.
And this was a massive undertaking. At its height, it was the largest, most expensive murder investigation in the country. Detectives like Dave Reichert and Robert Keppel, they were working around the clock. But they were just drowning in information, thousands of tips, thousands of potential suspects.
And what's so frustrating looking back is that they actually had a huge clue right at the very beginning, but the technology just wasn't ready for it.
The paint.
The paint. Tell us about the paint.
In 1982, on the clothing of one of the very first victims, forensic teams found spray paint.
Not just paint, right? It was something specific.
That's right. They were microscopic spheres of spray paint and overspray. But here's the absolute tragedy of it. In 1982, forensic analysis wasn't advanced enough to pinpoint the exact chemical composition or link it to a specific batch or company. So that evidence, that crucial clue, it just sat in an evidence locker.
And if they could have tested it back then?
If they'd had 21st century technology, they would have seen that it was a specific high-end industrial paint, an Imron paint, used at the Kenworth truck factory.
Where Gary Ridgway worked every single day.
Exactly. He was spraying trucks with that exact paint. It would have been a direct physical link between him and a victim at the very start of the investigation, but that evidence, it lay dormant for 20 years.
Unbelievable. So the task force is struggling. They're getting desperate. And in 1984, they do something that feels like it's straight out of a movie. They decide to go see a consultant.
This is the Hannibal Lecter moment. Dave Reichert and Robert Keppel, they get on a plane and they fly to Florida State Prison to interview Ted Bundy.
Bundy is on death row at this point. He is, without a doubt, the most famous serial killer in America. And they basically ask him, how do we catch this guy? What's he thinking?
And Bundy was fascinated by the Green River Killer. He even gave him a nickname, the Riverman. And Bundy, drawing from his own horrific experiences, offered some incredibly accurate insights.
What did he tell them?
He told the detectives that this killer wasn't done with the victims after they died. He was the one who suggested that the killer was probably revisiting the dump sites to have sex with the bodies.
Which was exactly what Ridgway was doing. Bundy saw it immediately.
He recognized his own pathology, his own brand of evil in the Green River Killer's actions, and he gave them specific actionable advice. He told them, if you find a fresh grave, don't dig it up, don't touch it, stake it out, wait. He will come back to his victims.
It's just so eerie that Bundy could see into Ridgway's mind so clearly. Did the police actually use that advice? Did they try to stake out a grave site?
They tried. They set up surveillance on graves. But Ridgway was either lucky or just cautious enough. He never walked into one of their traps. But Bundy's profile of the man they were hunting, it was spot on.
Now, we have to address the fact that Ridgway was a suspect during this time. This isn't a case where he was a total ghost until the end.
Not at all. He was on the radar very early on. In 1983, a victim named Marie Malvar disappeared. Her boyfriend actually saw the truck she got into. It looked like Ridgway's. He even followed it for a little bit. He gave that description to the police.
So bring him in for questioning.
They did. He was interviewed. But you have to remember, Ridgway's persona was friendly but strange. He was cooperative. He seemed helpful. He denied everything, of course. And then in 1984, he agreed to take a polygraph test.
The lie detector. We always hear about how unreliable these can be, but in this case, it literally let a monster walk free.
It gave him a pass. He passed the polygraph test. And in the eyes of the investigators at that time, that was a huge deal. It allowed him to slip back into the background. He went from being a prime suspect to just one of thousands of potential leads. And all the while, the killing continued.
Let's talk about that background he slipped into.
Yeah.
Because while he is committing these atrocities, he is living this bizarrely normal, almost performative double life. He gets married again, doesn't he?
He does, and during the second marriage in the mid-'80s, he becomes fanatically religious.
Fanatical really is the right word for it. The reports say he's going door to door, proselytizing for his church. He's reading the Bible out loud on his lunch breaks at work. He's breaking down in tears after sermons.
It's a massive overcompensation. Evil with this public display of holiness. But the contradiction is right there on the surface. He's demanding his wife follow these incredibly strict religious teachings to be modest and pure. But then he's also demanding that they have sex in public places, in the woods, sometimes in the exact same wooded areas where he had dumped bodies.
That is just, it's sickening. It's like he was getting off on the risk or the proximity to his own crimes, even with his wife.
It's all about power and ownership of those spaces. Those woods were his domain, his kingdom of death, and he was bringing her into it without her knowledge.
Then we get to the third wife, Judith Mawson. They married in 1988. And this part of the story always fascinates people because you always have to ask that question. How did the wife not know?
And Judith Mawson has spoken about this extensively in interviews since his arrest. She honestly, truly did not know. She describes him as a loving, attentive husband. She said he would leave for work early in the morning, telling her he had to work overtime shifts at the truck factory.
But he wasn't going to the factory.
No, that was his hunting time. But she believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was bringing home the paycheck. He was a good provider. Ridgway actually made the claim later that he killed less during his marriage to Judith because he truly loved her.
That is a very hard pill to swallow, him claiming to love anyone. But Judith herself has said she feels that, in a way, she saved lives just by being with him.
And if you look at the timeline, statistically, the murder rate did drop significantly during that marriage, but there were still cracks in the facade. There's the story of the missing carpet.
Oh, right. When she was moving her things into his house, she noticed there was no carpet in one of the rooms.
Just the bare floorboards. And years later, after his arrest, detectives told her, yeah, the reason there was no carpet in that room is because he almost certainly wrapped a victim's body in it and hauled it away.
Can you even imagine that? Living in a house, walking on those floors every single day and not knowing what happened right where you're standing?
It's the banality of evil all over again. He's just a regular guy with a missing carpet and a lot of overtime hours.
So how does this whole house of cards finally collapse? We have to jump forward to the year 2001.
Science finally caught up with Gary Ridgway. Back in 1987, during that period when he was a suspect, the police had taken saliva and hair samples from him. They didn't have the technology to do much with them then, but they kept them. They put them in storage.
And by 2001, DNA profiling technology had advanced light years beyond what they had in the 80s.
It was a completely different world. They were able to go back into cold storage, pull out those old samples, and run them through new DNA tests. And they got a match. They linked his DNA directly to sperm that had been found on several of the victims.
It was irrefutable.
Irrefutable. And do you remember that paint?
The microscopic spheres from the Kenworth truck paint.
They retested it with modern equipment. And this time, they could identify the chemical composition perfectly. It was a one-to-one match for the specific paint used at his workplace. The circle was finally closed, the paint and the DNA.
So, November 30, 2001, he's leaving work at the Kenworth factory after his shift.
And the Green River Task Force is there waiting for him. They arrest him in the parking lot. After 2 decades, it was over.
But it wasn't really over, was it? Because then the legal battle began. And this is where the story gets incredibly controversial.
Very controversial. Ridgway was facing multiple counts of aggravated first-degree murder. Washington state had the death penalty at the time, and if anyone in the history of the state qualified for it, it was a serial killer with dozens and dozens of victims.
But he didn't get the death penalty. He didn't get lethal injection. He made a deal.
He made the deal with the devil, as some of the victims' families called it. His defense lawyers approached the King County prosecutor with a proposal. A plea bargain.
What was the offer?
The offer was this. Ridgway would plead guilty to every single murder they could charge him with. And, crucially, he would cooperate fully. He would tell them everything. He would help the police locate the bodies of the women who were still missing, whose families had no answers. In exchange for all of that, they would take the death penalty off the table. He would get life in prison with no possibility of parole.
This was a huge, huge decision for the prosecutor at the time, Norm Malang. I remember the press conference where he explained his reasoning.
I do too. Malang stood up there and said, and I'm paraphrasing, Gary Ridgway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. But he argued that this deal was the only avenue to the truth. He said the mercy wasn't for Ridgway, it was for the families who had been waiting 20 years to know where their daughters were, to bring their remains home.
It's a purely utilitarian calculation, isn't it? Trade the death of one man for the answers to dozens of unsolved mysteries.
And in that sense, it worked. Ridgway led them to more remains. He sat with investigators for months, for over 180 hours, detailing the crimes in a cold, detached voice. He admitted he hated prostitutes and killed them so he wouldn't have to pay them. He admitted he killed so many he just lost count.
And the sentencing was just a stack of life sentences.
48 consecutive life terms, plus another 480 years for tampering with evidence, 1 decade for each victim. And then a 49th life sentence was added a few years later when another victim was identified.
Judge Richard Jones made it very clear that he would never, ever breathe free air again.
Not for a single second.
So he goes to prison. He's sent to the Washington State Penitentiary at Walla Walla, kept in solitary confinement. And for a long time, that was the end of the story for the public. But, and this is where we get to the really new information, the story didn't actually stop in 2003.
No, the work of a cold case detective never really stops. And in the last couple of years, specifically from 2024 through early 2026, we have seen some pretty significant movements in this case.
Let's start with the identifications, because for decades, there were victims known only as Bone 17 or Jane Doe B10.
That's right. And genetic genealogy has been an absolute game changer for these old cases. In late 2023 and into 2024, investigators finally identified Bone 17 as a young woman named Lori Ann Rasputnik. She was just 15 years old when she ran away from home in 1982, and Bones 20 was identified as Tammy Lyles.
And Wendy Stevens. She was the youngest confirmed victim, wasn't she?
Yes, she was only 14. For more than 30 years, she was just Jane Doe B10. Giving these girls their names back after all this time is a huge part of that ongoing mission for justice.
But then, things got really weird with Ridgway's incarceration status just recently. In September of 2024, there was this sudden, unexplained transfer.
It raised a lot of eyebrows in the media and among the victims' families. He was moved from the Supermax prison in Walla Walla to the much lower security King County Jail. And at the time, authorities were incredibly tight-lipped. They wouldn't say why.
But documents that were unsealed in March of 2025, just about a year ago now, they revealed the real reason for the move.
And it was exactly what the plea deal was all about. They brought him back to King County to help them locate more remains. Even in his mid-70s, even after all this time, they were still trying to wring every last drop of information out of him.
And then, just a couple of months ago, in December of 2025, reports started circulating everywhere that Gary Ridgway was on his deathbed.
The rumors were flying. That he was in hospice care, that he was receiving end-of-life treatment. Local radio stations were reporting it, citing anonymous sources within the prison system.
But the Department of Corrections officially shut that down, didn't they?
They did. They had to issue a formal statement saying the allegations were inaccurate. They acknowledged that he has health issues. I mean, he's an old man now, in his late 70s. But they made it very clear that he is not in hospice care.
The original sheriff, Dave Reichert, who was there from the absolute beginning, he had a pretty biting take on that whole rumor.
Reichert has never been one to mince words about Ridgway. He suggested the rumors probably started because a photo had leaked in 2024 showing Ridgway in a wheelchair. But he flat out called Ridgway a pathological liar. He basically said, don't believe anything this guy says or that comes out about him unless we can verify it 10 times over.
It is just wild to me that even now, in 2026, he is still generating headlines. He's still this dark cloud that hangs over the Pacific Northwest.
He is. And as long as there are still dozens of suspected victims who have never been found, that cloud isn't going to go away. The case is, in many ways, still open.
So what does this all mean in the end? When we step back and look at the total legacy of the Green River Killer, what do we learn?
I think, well, it's a legacy of almost unimaginable devastation. 49 confirmed dead, likely closer to 90, generations of families destroyed. But it's also a legacy of systemic failure.
How so?
Because the Green River case proved, in the most brutal way possible, that if you pick the right victims, women that society has marginalized, women deemed less than, you can operate with near impunity for a very, very long time. It forced police departments across the country to completely rethink how they investigate crimes against sex workers and runaways. It changed how law enforcement databases talk to each other.
And it brings us right back to that final difficult question about the plea deal.
It does. It's the question that still gets debated today.
The deal saved his life. He is sitting in a cell right now, breathing, eating 3 meals a day, because he traded the locations of his victims' bodies. Yeah.
It's the ultimate ethical dilemma for the justice system. Justice usually means punishment, an eye for an eye. In this case, they sacrificed the ultimate punishment in order to get the truth. So, was it worth it?
There's no easy answer.
There isn't. If you ask the mother who finally got her daughter's bones back after 20 years and could finally give her a proper funeral, she might tell you, yes, it was absolutely worth it. But if you ask someone who believes that justice for 49 murders demands the ultimate price, they'll tell you that justice was denied.
It's a heavy thought to end on, that we have this dyslexic truck painter, a man of low intelligence who used the simplest forms of manipulation and relied on society's indifference to become the most prolific convicted serial killer in American history.
It reminds us that monsters don't always look like monsters. They don't have horns and a tail. They look like the guy painting a truck next to you, or the guy sitting in the pew at church on Sunday.
And that, perhaps, is the scariest part of this entire story. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the Green River Killer.
Stay curious and stay critical.
We'll see you next time.